We are live. Hey, you guys. It is Lisa Alexander, founder of Stand Up Survivor, and I am with the amazing attorney Peterkin from SA Peterkin Law. Hi, Sonya.
Hi.
I'm so glad you joined me. So I'm going to just make sure that I can share this to a couple pages real quick, and then we can get started. Is that okay?
Great.
Okay, awesome. So y'all come on in. We are talking about domestic violence and immigration law. So make sure that you share this with someone who needs to know about it. And trust me, there are a lot of people that do. So I'm super excited that Attorney Peterkin is here with us today. Uh-oh. All right. So we're going to get started. Let me see. Okay. All right. So, hi, Sonya. I'm so glad that you joined me. I have been watching you, I don't know, for probably a couple of years now, just do the work that you do. And I think it's amazing. So thanks for being on here with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. So Attorney Peterkin has her own law firm. It's called the Law Office of SA Peterkin Law. Okay. And you guys, I'm going to give you all the information of how to contact her. I'll put it in the comments. And when I share later, I'll put it so you guys can reach out to her to get more information, like her page, follow her. She's doing a lot of great work in immigration law. And for myself, my family migrated over from Guyana. And so I know that you're Jamaican, right?
Yes.
Hey, okay. We just got to give a shout out. Let them know.
Yes.
And so I know if you want to just tell people a little bit about yourself and why you decided to go into immigration law.
Yes. So as you mentioned, I do have my roots are Jamaican. My parents are immigrants from the island of Jamaica. They came to the U.S. for a better life. My sisters and I were raised here in the U.S. And we kind of see firsthand the experiences of immigrants and what they have to go through in order to assimilate into a society and to make a better life for themselves. And so having that relationship and seeing that firsthand, I was encouraged to provide whatever type of help that I could to my immigrant community. I was also raised in an immigrant community, which is South Florida. Okay. You know that most people in South Florida are from the Caribbean. They're immigrating to the U.S. And so just, having that experience and also working with an immigration law firm while in law school, it drove me to continue to practice immigration law and to kind of give back to that community.
Awesome. And I know that while you're in law school, part of your bio says that you worked with Harbor House here in Orlando, Florida. And yes. So you did some injunction work while you were there as well. I know you don't do that much anymore, but that was part of what you did before.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So as interning with Harbor House, we helped individuals to obtain protective orders against their abusers. We attended court with them. We helped them to complete their petitions correctly. And we also received a lot of training in domestic violence, how to assess it, how to determine signs of domestic violence, and how to provide the correct resources to these victims so that they can get the help that they need.
And during that time, you also became a certified domestic violence advocate.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And at that time, I did not even understand how helpful that would have been to my immigration practice. But having that background and that training and specializing in this particular area of helping immigrant victims of domestic violence has been extremely beneficial to me and to my clients.
Wow, that's awesome. And I love how you've collaborated all of this, your experience as an attorney, domestic violence, and what you do. Right. And so we're going to talk about that tonight. And that's what I really admire about you too, because as a domestic violence advocate, it's wonderful to know that attorney is using their experience with domestic violence to help survivors. Right. Because one of the biggest things for survivors is that we just feel so lost. We don't really know what to do or who can help us. And to know that you've dedicated some of your practice to helping people in those domestic violence situations is amazing. So we're going to get started talking about some of those things tonight. Okay. Yeah. So I know the VAWA, you guys, if you hear us say VAWA, that is a Violence Against Women Act. Okay. And today I know we have some questions and I want you to be able to answer some questions maybe that come through the comments, but I'd like you to tell us what that is and how it helps survivors of domestic violence, please.
Right. So it is a mechanism that allows non-citizens to be able to independently apply for their residency without
Okay.
the help or cooperation of their abusive spouses. So in normal circumstances, when we're dealing with marriage-based green card petitions, the U.S. citizen or the legal permanent resident spouse must file a petition on behalf of their
Right.
non-citizen spouse in order for them to obtain, in order for the non-citizen to obtain a green card. So what that results in is that the victim, the non-citizen spouse, is oftentimes dependent, completely dependent on the U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident spouse to obtain lawful status in the U.S.
Okay. Okay. And so without them, they aren't able to get legal status to live here, to continue to stay here.
Correct, in normal
Okay.
circumstances. But
In
what
normal
VAWA
circumstances.
does is gives them a mechanism to break free of that and to independently file their own petition. So it's called self-petitioning VAWA. And
Okay.
self-petitioning just means that you're filing for your green card without having a sponsor or a petitioner file on behalf of you.
Okay, so it's called self-petitioning VAWA, and that's for someone who's experiencing domestic violence, trying to get their green card outside of their abuser.
Correct.
Okay, is this a form? Do they have to make a phone call? How do they get in this information? Oh, you went somewhere. Come back. There you are.
I went away. I'm getting a lot of notifications coming in.
Yeah.
So how do they go about doing this? So yes, there is a form. It's called an I-360 form. That's the VAWA petition. And it's also used for other circumstances as well. Okay, so the form may look a little confusing because it's not just for VAWA applicants, it's for other types of cases. But you would file that form, and depending on whether your abuser is a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, that will dictate when you can actually apply for your green card. Okay, so the I-360 is just giving you, if that is approved, it gives you the ability to then apply for your green card without the help of a petitioner or a sponsor.
Okay, and that's what the self-petitioning VAWA form. How long does that process usually take?
Right. So VAWA normally takes, I would say, about 18 months to 2 years.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, and that's just kind of the norm for the immigration process anyway.
Okay.
They don't have quick turnaround times for immigration applications, and normally it's very costly. But for VAWA cases, there is no filing fee for the VAWA petition. So that enables victims who are financially dependent on their U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse the ability to access this form of relief.
Oh my goodness, such goodies. You're giving us such good information.
Yeah.
I know this might be a lot to, if you have to come back and watch the replay, please do, so you can take notes. But there is no filing fee for the self-petitioning VAWA I-360 form.
Correct.
But I'm just learning it takes 18 months. And I guess the immigration process does take a long time anyway, but 18 months to 2 years. Right. I think that's really important because it's not a short process.
No, it's not. However, if your abuser is a U.S. citizen, you may be able to apply for a work permit during the interim of your VAWA application pending with USCIS. So that's the great thing about VAWA, is that if you are an immediate relative, you don't have to wait to apply for your green card. There's no visa limitations for immediate relatives. And so you can apply, you can do a concurrent filing with your green card application and an application for work authorization. And so if you file everything together, you can obtain your work authorization within about 6 months after filing your VAWA application.
I think that's
Sorry, so it can get very technical as far as the process, because it really depends case by case, depends on the, especially depending on the status of the abuser, the immigration status of the abuser. But yes, it does depend case by case, and you want to definitely consult with an immigration attorney if you think that you may qualify for this type of relief.
That's really good. I like when you talked about the work permit too, because oftentimes the survivor's not working, and so they have no income, and that's one of the biggest things, the financial abuse. So if I do leave my abusive partner, how do I work? I can't support myself, and they know that, and so they use that as a reason to keep them there. So that's good.
And that's one of the reasons why VAWA was created, because I think Congress recognized that this system that we have in place, this family-based immigration system, allows for the non-citizen to be completely reliant on the U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse. And this kind of creates a tool for the U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse to use their status, their citizenship or their residency status, to exert power and control over their non-citizen spouse by threatening them with deportation, threatening them that, they'll report them to law enforcement, convincing them that they have no rights in the U.S. Or less rights than they do. Making them also financially dependent on their abusive spouse. This is kind of the environment that the family-based immigration system creates, and this is what birthed VAWA.
That is so good. I think you hit on a lot of gorgeous points in there. But I think too, because the abuser's goal, like you said, is power and control.
Exactly.
And because there's not two citizens, he's able to use something more to control what above what they're already trying to do to control. So you talked about there is an immigration power and control wheel.
Yes.
Right.
I was just going to mention that. Yes.
Okay,
so there's a power and control wheel that is just for it encompasses all the different forms of abuse that victims of domestic violence face, but then there's one that's specifically for immigrants because they face domestic violence a little bit differently. They have different vulnerabilities that other people who are experiencing domestic violence don't have. For example, their immigration status creates certain obstacles for them to leave abusive relationships. Many of them are not even able to open a bank account because they don't have social security numbers. They're not able to get work and jobs because they don't have work authorization. Sometimes there are children involved, and this is a big one because they don't believe that because they're not U.S. citizens or permanent residents, or because they have no immigration status, they don't believe that they have any rights. So they don't believe that a court would grant them custody of the children. So they're afraid they'll lose their children if they leave their abusive spouse. There's so many different intricacies that come into play when immigrants are the ones who are facing domestic violence.
So with the immigration power control wheel, I'm sure we can Google it. Do you have it on your website or anywhere?
I have it pulled up.
Okay, awesome.
And a lot of it, they experience it on a different level than people who are not immigrants. Like, for example, isolation is a form of abuse that we see across the board. But for immigrants, it's a little bit different because immigrants often come here without any family or friends. The only person they even know in this country is their abusive spouse. And so the abusive spouse will prevent them from even being able to contact their family members in their home country. They'll limit the access that they have to the phones. They'll limit their access that they have outside of the home. So they experience isolation in a different way sometimes. There's also economic abuse, which we talked about them being financially dependent because they actually have no ability to work. Right. Or sometimes the abuser forces them to work under the table. And when they earn their money, they have to give it to their U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse. Or sometimes they get a job and it's under the table and their spouse will threaten to report them to law enforcement for doing that. So there is also sexual abuse, where some immigrants are actually brought to the U.S. for the purposes of for trafficking, for sexual purposes.
And that's a big one. We all know that's a big one.
Yes, that's a big one. And there's actually another visa that's specifically for people who have been trafficked. It's a T visa. So there are different types of humanitarian visas as well. So VAWA is one of them. Not everybody who has experienced domestic violence will qualify under VAWA. That's another point
that's good.
Mentioned before. So for VAWA, you have to meet a certain type of relationship with the abuser. So for people who have never actually married their abuser, they're just dating, but they've experienced domestic violence, they probably will not qualify under VAWA. But they may qualify for a different type of relief. There's a U visa that they may qualify for that does not have that relationship requirement.
Okay.
Right. And that's for victims of crime.
Okay.
So, and there's certain crimes that qualify, and you also have to be cooperating with law enforcement to help them with the investigation of that crime. So there are different requirements for that. So, I think in any situation where you're experiencing domestic violence, instead of trying to determine whether you qualify or not, you should speak with an immigration attorney, and they could tell you what your different options are.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal too. I think because we talked before we got on about how they use the intimidation and fear, and before they even the survivor even tries to do anything, they say, "Oh, forget it, I won't qualify anyway." They've already gotten into their head. They've already given up before they've even tried, before they've even spoken to anyone.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the power and control rule is very helpful because also there's an incorrect notion that people who qualify for VAWA have to be physically abused, and they have to have evidence of this physical abuse, and that is not correct. This power and control rule, which, as you said, you can find it on Google. You can just do a quick search and find it. But it includes things like we just talked about: isolation, economic abuse. These are things that you cannot take a picture of, physical markings. And so that's why it's so important to consult with someone who is experienced in these types of cases that could help you to develop the case the correct way. And we'll talk about evidence later.
Okay, perfect.
The standard for evidence is lowered for victims of domestic violence because Congress understands that victims of domestic violence oftentimes have very serious obstacles in their way from obtaining documentation to prove the abuse or to prove that the marriage is bona fide.
Right.
VAWA has so many different aspects, so I might be jumping to different things.
That's okay. I'm taking notes, so we can go back and forth. That's okay. It's so interesting.
There's another portion that people need to know. I mean, it's not just experiencing domestic violence that will qualify you for VAWA. You must also prove other requirements as well. Like, for example, you have to prove that the marriage was actually a legitimate marriage. Yeah, you have to prove that the marriage is bona fide. And people, a lot of the times, from my experience, is that the victims have just as much a difficult time providing evidence that the marriage was bona fide as they do providing evidence of the abuse.
That's interesting.
Because one of the ways that the U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse will show their abuse to the victim is by taking control over the victim's documentations, their passports, their birth certificates, keeping those things locked away from their victim because they know that they're going to need it at some point if they want to break free of that relationship. If they want to leave, they're going to probably find those documents very useful. So they have control over the house finances, the documentation, everything, and they keep it locked and away from the victim so that the victim won't even have access to them. So a lot of the times they have I
have a question. How do you prove that the marriage was legit? Like what proof is, I mean, you can't show love. I mean, I don't know. How do you prove that it was real?
Well, that's, so I practice mostly family-based immigration. So even if you're not filing VAWA, just any type of marriage-based green card petition, you have to prove that your marriage is bona fide. So we deal with this a lot. And we refer to these documents as bona fide documents. And these documents can take many different forms. They don't look any specific way. It depends on the particular case. Okay. I'll just give you some examples, but these are only examples, right?
Okay.
Well, first of all, you definitely need to show that you have a legal marriage. So you have to provide a marriage certificate. But in addition to that, you can provide things like joint bank accounts, joint health insurance, joint life insurance. They want things that typical husband and wife to show that your lives are really entwined, and that you're living as husband and wife. So they're looking for joint bank accounts, joint life insurance. They're looking for things like on your social media. They are checking your social media to see what's there, if you have, some other relationship going on, or if your spouse is anywhere on your social media. It could take form of proof that you're living together. The bills are in both of your names. their
So nothing like extraordinary. There's nothing you said was like extraordinary. Bills, bank accounts.
Nothing extraordinary, but you would be surprised how difficult some of that is. For victims, because everybody's marriage is different.
Yeah.
And some people, there may be obstacles in place with getting health insurance. So sometimes they don't have health insurance. So there's no proof of joint health insurance because none of them have health insurance.
Right.
Life insurance, not everybody has life insurance. Not everybody has a job that enables them, that gives them life insurance. Not everybody goes out and tries to receive or try to get life insurance.
Or even like a bank account, especially with an abuser, he's not putting your name on their bank account.
Exactly. Yeah. Your name is not going on that account. And then sometimes there are also obstacles in place, like, for example, a bank will not allow you to add your name to a bank account without a social security number in some situations.
So then therefore, if they don't have a social security number, they're not part of the account.
Exactly. Okay. So you'd be surprised. Those documents might seem very, basic to obtain, but they're not. For immigrants, they have, obstacles in place that may not allow them to.
Okay.
Provide.
Well, I have a question from someone. Does a DV case have to be active multiple times, or is this something that can be bought on the first incident? Like, does there have to be multiple times a domestic violence incident, or could it be a one-time incident?
Yeah, there's no requirement that it has to be ongoing. Now, I think that definitely would have a stronger case if there's a pattern of abuse happening. And most of the time, when there is one incidence of abuse, there's other things in place that the victim doesn't even recognize is a form of abuse. That's another thing. Some people may not even think that they qualify for VAWA, but when you go to speak with an experienced immigration attorney who's able to screen you and understands domestic violence and what to look for, you may be surprised that you actually do have a case, because domestic violence doesn't have to take the form that many people typically, stereotype domestic violence to look like. It could take many different forms. Like, for example, I have a client who's male. So VAWA is not just for females. It's also men are also able to apply for a green card under VAWA.
And VAWA is the Violence Against Women Act. For everybody who's just popping in, VAWA is the Violence Against Women's Act. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
When he consulted with me, he had no idea that we would be going that route, because he had no idea that he was a victim. That's the thing. A lot of times victims are not able to understand, what types of behaviors are considered abusive behavior. And they're not able to understand that they're actually victims. Right. So with speaking with him, he was able, just speaking with him and screening him, we heard things like his wife would take his phone and throw it against the wall. And she did this on several occasions where he had to purchase at least 3 different phones because she kept destroying them. Very, very possessive, wanted to know his every move, very jealous, wanted to know who he was talking to on the phone at every moment, would even get jealous if he was talking with his mother on the phone. He had children back home, but she didn't want him to send any money for the children, didn't want him to communicate with the children. This is isolation. These are things that he didn't recognize will qualify him for VAWA. And that's why I think it's so important that if you have an immigration situation, or even if you're experiencing any type of discomfort or harm or issues within your marriage, you should consult with an immigration attorney to see what your options are. I've had countless people come to my office and they're in tears because they know that something is wrong. Right. And they know that they can't take it anymore. That's all they know. That's why they're there. They're not there because they think they qualify for VAWA. They're there because they don't know what to do. And they know that their immigration status is in the hands of their abuser. Wow. So they come to me in tears, just wanting to just tell me about their situation and ask what they could do. And at that point, screening them and talking to them more in depth about their marriage and the type of behavior that their abuser is showing, it enables me to determine that they do qualify for VAWA and they can leave their abuser. A lot of people also think that they can't divorce if they want to file for VAWA. And that is not true. You can still qualify for VAWA after divorcing if you file within 2 years of filing.
Okay, so if you divorce your abuser, you still qualify for the Violence Against Women's Act.
Exactly, but you have to
within
file within the 2 years. Right?
Okay, within the 2 years.
Right.
Okay, so let me just go back. I want to touch on a couple of things that you said. I think what you said was really important. That if you, first of all, you use the word discomfort, which I thought was really good, because sometimes like we don't know what's wrong, but we know that something's wrong.
Yes, exactly.
You know, and I kind of, this is like the worst analogy, but like say if you have like a stomach pain and you're like, it doesn't feel like I know my body, and just like you know your relationship, like something isn't good, something's not healthy. I'm uncomfortable. Let me go talk to someone. But I think most of all, you said the stomach. You know, the stomach analogy probably wasn't the best, but you get it.
It was great.
But like you talked about, go talk to an immigration attorney. But I think the thing is that you specified is someone who has experience with domestic violence, because there's an immigration attorney and there's an immigration attorney with domestic violence experience. And I say the same thing, even when it comes to a counselor or a therapist. Yeah, you can go see a therapist, and I'm an advocate for therapy. But if you're experiencing domestic violence, your best bet would be to connect with someone who has experience with domestic violence, because the avenues are different. What they're looking for is different, you know, and because you have the experience as an attorney with domestic violence, you're broadening. Okay, this isn't just a paperwork or a green card situation.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's another thing. So when we have people come to our office, we don't just leave them with, yes, we can file your paperwork for you. We also leave them with resources where they could go and get help. That's very important. Yeah. So we're not just looking to see how we can, get you legal status in the U.S. We're looking to see how we can also help you, cope through this difficult situation.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, that the lens is on correctly. Yeah, you can see an immigration attorney, but I would encourage you, if you're experiencing domestic violence, to talk to one that has experience with domestic violence as well. Right. So I want to go back to something you said, that sometimes the abuser will use children as a big one. A lot of women that I've talked to, they're afraid to leave their abuser because they have children, or they say, I'm keeping the children and you'll get deported back. Yeah. So can we just talk about that real quick? I mean, as mothers, don't mess with my children. You know, right. it's exactly. And we do anything for them.
They will not leave. Yeah, they will do anything, even stay in very, very dangerous relationships. So on the power and control reel for immigrant women, there's actually a part of the reel that says using children. Mm-hmm. And it says that the abuser will usually threaten to take the children away. Yep. And also, sometimes they even threaten to take the children away from the U.S., right?
Yeah, that's true.
Oftentimes when people are here without immigration status, they can't leave the country, because if they leave, they're not going to be able to come back in.
Nope.
Okay. No. So sometimes they'll threaten to take the children away, and they'll also threaten to report the children to immigration, because sometimes the children are also without the proper without
papers
status.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So they're trying to protect not only themselves but also the children. And
so
it just becomes really complicated.
What advice would you give a survivor who's listening or who's going to watch this later and say, this is my situation, but I don't want to lose my children. Right. What can I do?
Well, I think one important thing to know is that family court is family court. They don't have jurisdiction over your immigration matters. Okay. And also, there are certain factors, at least in the state of Florida, that the court uses to make custody determinations.
Okay.
And the factors are actually listed in the statute. Okay. So there's statutory factors that the court uses to determine custody matters. Okay. And immigration status is not one of those factors.
Okay. Good to know.
Immigration status is not one of those factors. And also, you need to know that the abuser will use that tactic in order to prevent you from leaving. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They will do this. They will make you think that you have no other option but to stay in this relationship with them.
Yeah.
And that's the case with the majority of clients that come to me and have VAWA cases. They had no idea that they had any right to divorce their spouse. They had no idea that they had any rights to their children, because this is what they were led to believe. But it is false. You do have rights. And even if you have no immigration status, you do have a right to report the abuse.
Okay, that's good. That's good too, because oftentimes immigrants do not report the abuse because of their green card status or lack of it. So, what are your thoughts when it comes to that? Like, they're in an abusive relationship, but they're not reporting because of their immigration status.
Well, I think it's inappropriate for any police officer to respond to a DV type case by by asking the abuser the victim what their status is.
Right. Very true.
I don't think that's something that is typical. I don't think so, but
it's not necessary either.
It's not necessary. And I do understand though that fear, of being outed. And that's what oftentimes just the reality of people here in the US without the proper documentation. They're just kind of living in the shadows. It's a very unfortunate situation.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really painful one, actually, one that's really difficult for a lot of survivors that live maybe in remote areas or areas that are kind of laying low because they don't have papers, but they're being abused, And I think we're just here to tell you, like, you have a voice, you have rights, whether you have your papers or not. You have rights, you have an ability to get a divorce, you have rights to your children, and I think it's easy to say, but they need to hear this, I think, because they're suffering at the hand of your abuser because they've made them believe that they don't have any rights because they don't have status. And I think that's really important to recognize that they do. Right. So when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that you don't have to leave your abuser to qualify. So can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, no, there is no requirement that you have to leave your abuser. So if you are in a situation, you may still qualify for VAWA, even though you have not divorced your spouse. You don't need to divorce your spouse. You don't need to be living in separate households. That's not one of the requirements for VAWA.
So you could be working on your violence against women. I'm going to say it out loud because I'm a little slow. So you don't have to, you can be working on your Violence Against Women Act process, but still be living in the home, married to the abuser in the relationship, but still working on that to get out.
Yes.
Basically. Okay.
That is a possibility. Now, in my office, that's not the norm for me. I've never had a client that continued to live with her abuser, but it's important that people know that that is still a possible option.
Like they don't have to leave first.
Yeah, because a lot of times that it's difficult for abusers to leave for victims to leave their abuser. Yeah. And it sometimes 7 times before they leave their abuser. And so I think it's important for people who are probably not ready, who are probably, not ready, but still need some type of immigration relief, to know that that's still an option for them.
Yeah. I think about it like this: as a survivor, like not having a job and you don't work. And this is just normal. This is not with any immigration issues. On top of you're already isolated, you're not working, you don't have money, your self-worth is in the garbage, you don't really have anything. And then that's just a regular survivor with no immigration issues. You already feel low. You already feel like down. On the other hand, you have this immigration issue where it's like, I'm worse than that. Like I have nothing. I do not want to be deported back to my country. I have no family or friends or support. And I think it's really important to recognize. That's why I was so happy that we did this, because you do have a voice. And I think if anything, we're making sure tonight that they know that they do have a voice. So I'm really appreciative that you're on here, Sonya. So let's talk about the different types of abuse that the Violence Against Women Act recognizing. I know you touched on it a little bit, but let's first of all, I'm gonna say something, because you did touch on it earlier. You talked about how verbal abuse, emotional abuse, they recognize this. Yeah. And I was like, hold on, time out, because in the regular court systems, that's something that's kind of overlooked.
Right. Protective orders even. Yeah. And it's so sad. It's so sad. When I used to work with Harbor House, it was so difficult for people who had no witnesses, because a lot of victims go through the abuse without any witnesses. Yep. Because it's done in their home. Yep. And there's no one else there except for them and their abuser. And so sometimes it can be difficult for people to obtain the protective orders that they need based on verbal abuse and psychological abuse and financial abuse. Especially, I've never seen anybody get a protective order for financial abuse.
Yeah, because how do you prove it?
But so for us, really for VAWA, as I said, the standard is pretty low. So you can actually have a VAWA case approved with just a very detailed, credible self-declaration, which is a sworn statement.
Yeah,
okay,
that's awesome.
But I do not recommend that people who are filing pro se without an attorney, I don't recommend that they file just, with on that basis, because the affidavits or the self-declaration has to be done very well. And usually people who practice VAWA, like myself, we have a system in place to make sure that it's done very well.
So you assist them with that?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Of course. That is one of the most important pieces of evidence that we submit with our applications. Because a lot of times, as I said, we have a very difficult time getting the other types of documentation that can be used. Police reports could be used, but they don't have to be present to have a VAWA case. In fact, most of my VAWA cases do not have police reports, and they're approved. Because, as I said, they're not going to call the police. They're too afraid of deportation or of them being the ones that are arrested, which is a whole other story. They're going to face immigration consequences for an arrest for DB. Very serious immigration consequences too.
So that's why they wouldn't call too.
That's another reason. Yeah, especially in the men. So if the man is the one that's being abused, he's not going to call the police probably, because he doesn't want to be the one that is arrested. And just the arrest can have serious immigration consequences. But
my goodness, that's terrible.
I know.
But I mean, I get it. It makes sense.
Yeah.
You still have that fear of them arresting you, and then if you do, then a whole nother level of issues. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So
did I take your train of thought?
Yes, you caught my train of thought.
Yeah, I'm good for that. So we're talking about the different types of abuse that is needed to, that the act recognizes.
Yes. So it's not just physical. I think we're talking about also the type of evidence, and we're talking about self-declarations being fine. Police reports are good, but they don't have to be present. Psych evaluations. I like to have psych evaluations for mine. They're not required, but I do like to have them there to support the self-declaration. So the psych evaluations, I have psychologists or mental health specialists that will see the client. Usually they'll have more than one session, and then they'll make recommendations, and they'll write a report on the client's mental health, which will show.
So that's good.
Yes, oftentimes it dives into the type of behavior that the abuser was showing, and how it's abusive, and how it's affected the victim in whatever ways. So it's we work with psychologists and mental health specialists to have that done. If you ever went to a shelter or saw a social worker at the shelter, those are also helpful evidence.
And this is for verbal abuse. This is for even verbal and emotional abuse.
Yeah, for verbal and emotional abuse. That's that's why we usually use the psych evaluation. I've had physical abuse where it was done on it just absolutely horrible physical abuse, and we didn't do a psych eval for that. But if we have a situation where there's and you know what, most of the time when there's one form of abuse, there are others.
Multiple, of course.
Most of the time where it's mostly verbal, there has been at least one or two instances of physical, and they usually come out during the course of the representation or during the course of preparing the case. That's when we find out, oh, well, she did, pull on you or push you into the wall. Those are types of physical abuse. So that's another thing that you'll come to find when you work. And I'm sure, as you know, from working with victims of domestic violence, there's usually more than one form of abuse that the abuser uses to exert power and control. So
let me ask you a question about what if I'm a victim of domestic violence, but I've never filed an injunction before? Is that mandatory as evidence for the Violence Against Women Act? Okay.
No, it's not. And as I said, you can file a VAWA case with just your self-declaration. Of course, I don't recommend I recommend that you see an attorney before you file anything for VAWA, first of all. But in certain circumstances, you just don't have much evidence, but that does not disqualify you. And that's what I want people to know.
Okay.
It does
Good.
not disqualify you because you don't have an injunction, or because you do not have a divorce, or because you don't have a police report, or because you never went to a shelter. None of that is a determining factor on whether you're going to be approved for under the Violence Against Women Act.
Okay. So you just said, I always recommend talking to an attorney. And I'm going to ask you why. As an attorney, we know y'all ain't cheap. We'll just be honest. Y'all are cheap. But I think you're not. And I mean, yeah, you went to school for a long time for this. But I think it's important to talk about that because, like you said, you don't recommend, you recommend talking to an attorney. Why? Why? Because, I mean, before you're an attorney, you're a woman, you know, and you're a mother. And I know you can speak on that level too. So why do you recommend speaking to an attorney about before applying for the Violence Against Women Act?
I think the stakes are very high with these types of cases. I mean, so in some cases they're life and death situations. In some cases it's not life and death situations, but you're unable to work. You're unable to break free of your abuser. You're unable to take control of your life. And so I think that, you know, filing this application and filing it right is important. I think it's important to anybody who is trying to seek a green card on this basis. And again, anytime you have experience or training on something, that minimizes the possibility of mistake. It minimizes the possibility of delays. It minimizes the possibility of a denial, because you have someone who is trained and passionate and experienced in this form of relief, versus someone who has no experience at all, you know, regarding this form of relief. And I just think that because the stakes are so high, it's important to at least consult with the immigration attorney.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And again, as we talked about before, a lot of times people are unable to ascertain that they're even victims, or ascertain that this form of relief is even available, because it can get pretty complicated. You know, preparing the case can be complicated, and figuring out whether you qualify for it can be complicated. As I said, not everybody, even if you are clearly a victim of domestic violence, you have, let's say you have all the physical abuse and you have pictures and you have police reports, you still may not qualify for Violence Against Women's Act. That's very important to know, because maybe you're not married to the abuser. Maybe the relationship that's required is not there. Maybe you can't prove good moral character, which is one of the requirements.
Goodness.
Maybe you're not able to prove that maybe you never lived with the abuser. That's another requirement. You understand? So there are a lot of intricacies in there. It's not just, you know, if you're a victim of domestic violence, then here you will get approved for the Violence Against Women's Act. You might need to file something else, like a U visa or a T visa. You understand?
And with that knowledge, as an attorney, that's why it's important to have someone who has the experience. Yes, I understand that. I have a question that someone asked. So they're a victim of domestic violence, have a child. He's tried to hold the child from them. And so they left, but the application for naturalization was denied, and they have 30 days to appeal it. What do you have any advice, suggestions? What do you suggest? Because I don't know what application for naturalization is, but they applied for it and they were denied, and they have 30 days to reapply.
Right. So application for naturalization is when you're applying for citizenship. Right. So supposing she was a permanent resident and now she's filing to obtain citizenship, so she would file a naturalization application. It has been denied. I would need to review the denial notice. I need to see the specific reasons that USCIS denied the naturalization application. And then from there, I can determine whether she needs to file an appeal or whether she needs to just refile. Because sometimes it's better just to refile, because sometimes the appeals take very long. I think it really just depends on the specific reasons that it was denied. So,
and what if she didn't mention? Okay, what if she didn't? She said, give her a call. I'll put her information in here, Attorney Peterkin's information. But what if she didn't, in that petition, talk about domestic violence? Would that have helped her case at all? Or, I mean,
not for naturalization. That's not one of the crimes for naturalization. So it appears as though she's already became a permanent resident.
Okay.
So you have to be a permanent resident for a certain amount of years
to go for naturalization.
Right?
Okay.
And the domestic violence wouldn't be relevant to whether she would be approved or not, unless there was something wrong with how she obtained the green card. They're doing that a lot now too. They're looking at the way that you've obtained your green card, because sometimes people have obtained their green card through fraud or through some other means. And so when you're filing a naturalization application, they're looking very deeply into your background, even as far as to when you filed your green card and the means and
you
how
did to get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, that's why it's very important. She'll have to talk, call me and we could schedule a consultation. I could talk with her, in depth about her case and what she filed and, the reasons for the denial. And we'll come up with a strategy to help her.
Okay, awesome. She's watching, so I know she heard that. So I know we talked a little bit about the different types of abuse that immigrants suffer that is different than a regular survivor would suffer that has their papers.
Right.
And I know, so if you are listening and there is an immigration power and control wheel, and you can Google that and find that information. We'll also put it up on our website, and I'll share it on the page a little bit later tonight as well for you to check it out. And I know you talked about, so this really blows my mind a little bit though, because, which is amazing that verbal and emotional abuse is recognized, but I just wish that it was also recognized in the regular court system as something as significant as it is, because you don't have to put a hand on someone to completely destroy them. And so, as an advocate, I have to say that I wish it was recognized in the regular court systems every day for survivors.
You know what? Maybe we can touch base and try to do something about it. See what can be done about it. That's one of the reasons, if I were to be honest with you, that I don't practice I don't help with protective orders anymore. I just don't like the way that they're being handled in court. And being a domestic violence advocate and knowing that abuse can take so many different forms. There's spiritual abuse, there's financial abuse, and these things are not recognized normally in court. And it's very frustrating. Maybe
I appreciate that disclosure. And yes, I'm always about, let's do it, because people are, because it's really holding a lot of people back in their relationship or keeping the relationship, because they're like, well, no one's going to help me anyway. Or you're not going to go in, no one's going to open the shelter doors because you're emotionally abused, but literally you're losing your mind in that home. But there's no one that's going to take you in because they haven't beat you or choked you or killed you. You know what I mean? We really need to start recognizing those things. So I'm in for making sure we do something about that.
Let's do it.
If you guys have any questions before we let Attorney Peterkin go, please put them in the comment box. We'll see if we can. Anything else you want to share before we head out? Anything else?
No, not really. We just want people to know that, VAWA, the Violence Against Women's Act, may be available to people that you wouldn't even consider that it may be an option for you. But as we talked about before, if you are in a situation where you're feeling uncomfortable, you're feeling distrust with your spouse, you're feeling uncertain about your immigration future, and you are feeling uncomfortable within your relationship, you may want to just consult with an attorney just to see what your options are. If you are seeing an attorney that has experience in domestic violence and in Violence Against Women's Act, they may be able to screen you and let you know what kinds of options you have available. But don't try to self-diagnose yourself and then take yourself out of the purview of VAWA when it could very well be an option for you.
That's good. I really like that. What do you know much about people who try to come here? Well, say if they fled to the United States due to domestic violence in their home country. I don't deal with a lot of that, but there is asylum. That would be asylum when you're fleeing away from your home country due to domestic violence or some other kind of persecution. I don't deal a lot with that, but there is something for that. There is something for that. And it's called okay. Because I have had several survivors reach out about that. They're here because they fled abuse in their country and they don't want to go back. So what do they do?
Exactly.
So we had a question here. Attorney Peterkin, did you mention the options available to the children of U.S. citizens who were abused as well?
Yes. So VAWA is not, so I was focusing more on the spousal, petitions between husband and wife. However, VAWA is not just for spouses. It's also available for children who experience domestic violence at the hands of their abusive parents.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's definitely, and it's also available also for parents who experience domestic violence at the hands of their own children.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So that's another reason, it kind of gets a little bit complicated who is eligible for the type of relief, but it is not only for spouses.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for your question, Onika. Raquel, I agree with you. I feel like sometimes you do have to be seriously injured before they're held accountable, but we definitely want to change it. I know some states have started recognizing emotional abuse, verbal abuse. So also availability to abuse parents. Okay, you said that too. So yes. To abuse parents, because you know what, you would be surprised how many young people are abusing their parents. It's getting ridiculous. And so that is one DV attorney advocate to another. Okay, so awesome. Thank you so much, Attorney Peterkin. I just want to say, I love this conversation because I really feel for those who are in immigrant situations, domestic violence situations, who really, really feel like they have nowhere to go. No one can help them. They just have to suffer in silence. Right. And we're just here to tell you that's not the case. You'll have options available. We don't want you to die at the hand of your abuser. We don't want you to spend another day experiencing that kind of pain, and your children as well. And so reach out to us. Let's see what the conversation needs to get started. Attorney Peterkin gave some really, really great pointers. So if you need to watch this again, please do share this with someone who you know. Just share it on your page. Share it to someone you know who's an immigrant who may be experiencing domestic violence and you don't even know it. So, all right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I am going to put your information in the contact, so anybody who would like to connect with you can ask you any questions or inbox you or hire you for that matter. So thank you so much, Attorney Peterkin. We appreciate you. We'll see you later.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.